able to start at 9 because of the sudden change of the password. My deepest apologies to you. This is our first venture into something like this, which we are coordinating from Delhi, Salem, and Madurai. And we have participants participating from 17 states. I first want to thank all the participants for having registered, and we can assure you that we will try to offer you the best resources of this country, people with knowledge, people with a lot of skills, but more than all that, people with a lot of passion and humanness in them whom we have to be introduced to. I'm extremely thankful that we have had in the first module itself almost 37 resource persons who have confirmed participation. You are all, technically you are all muted just to ensure that we have proper coordination, and we will come to the technical announcements at the end. We will go ahead with this program. I also want to invite the media and welcome the media who are also following this program, some of them on Zoom, and all other friends who are following it on Facebook Live. The whole program is going on Facebook Live as well. So welcome to every program effort, and that we are able to introduce to this large number of registered participants, of experts, more than that, passionate rights, not only country, but also globally. We will have 4 modules. In the module 2, 3, and 4, so I do hope you will have no problems in the technical side. Let me now invite Justice Anand Venkatesh to come in. Before Justice Anand Venkatesh starts his inaugural address, I want to tell you that we have before us a young judge from the Madras High Court, a judge who is passionate to the law and believes in not only understanding the law, but extending the law in order that the law is able to benefit a large section of people, particularly the vulnerable. I'm proud to say that all our members of the bar unanimously will speak for his utmost honesty and uprightness. He is somebody who is always thinking, has been participating throughout this period of the corona in a number of webinars, lectures, as well as writing a number of passionate articles. Extremely thankful to you, Justice, for having accepted to be with us with your inaugural today and your blessings. You can be sure that we will be attempting our own measures to ensure that human rights becomes more popular and human rights become a passionate word across the country, and the Constitution is ultimately upheld. I will now invite Justice Venkatesh, Anand Venkatesh, to speak. I already want to tell you that Justice Anand Venkatesh also has to serve on the bench today, and therefore, very, very unfortunately, it is not his practice to do so, will be having to withdraw from this program before the end of the program because of his duty in court today. Over to you, Justice Anand Venkatesh.
Yeah, good morning to you all. Mr. Henry, the chief organizer of this program, the dignitaries who have been invited for this program, the participants who have applied for this course, ladies and gentlemen. I deem it a honor and privilege for having invited me to deliver the inaugural address in this special occasion, where the organizers are in the process of conducting a certificate course in human rights. This inaugural speech becomes even more special for me since for the first time I deliver a speech touching upon human rights without having the advantage of looking at human faces. I have to really congratulate Mr. Henry for having put in such an enormous effort in bringing together people from across the country in order to conduct this certificate course. The human rights, as you all know, is a right which every human possesses by virtue of his being a human. It is not given by someone, but the study of human rights is only to understand and enforce the right which we acquire by just being born. You all know this started getting into the limelight with the Magna Carta of the year 1215 and the Bill of Rights of 1689, etc. The real acceleration started during the Second World War, where the whole world started looking into the level of persecution that was going on across the world, done by under the aegis of the state and countries. The human rights today has entered into an era of science and technology, and it keeps expanding by the day. Before I touch upon some of the issues which I want to address during this session, I would honestly submit that the concept of human rights requires a complete overhauling of our understanding of human rights from a traditional viewpoint which focuses more on the physical violation, and we have to very rapidly move into the protection of the one which I term it as a mental violation, failing which we will very soon become irrelevant in a very near future. I was glancing through the curriculum that was circulated, and I found it to be really exhaustive. This is something you all are going to learn in the coming days, and therefore I do not want to really spend my time on those areas which are already forming part of the curriculum. During this short time, I would want to focus upon certain important issues and leave it to you to deliberate upon during your course period. The first and foremost is that if you want to be a champion of human rights, you must first respect it and follow it in your day-to-day life. Our thought, our words, and actions must fall in line. When it comes to identity, my friends, there are three aspects to it. What others are thinking about you, what you are thinking about yourself, and what you actually are. These are three completely different things altogether. Unless you identify what actually you are, you can never be a true human being. Respecting human rights starts from home. How are you treating your parents? How are you treating your own wife and husband, as the case may be? How are you treating your children? How are you treating your neighborhood, your friends? How are you treating persons who are working under you, who are working for you? All these things, all these small aspects actually builds up your character. And a person who fails in this small bits of things about which I referred can never be a true champion of human rights. Be very attentive to your inner character and make it pure and strong before you start functioning outside. Don't use this platform only to gain popularity. You will get very badly exposed. The next thing into which I wanted to focus is part 4 of the Constitution of India, which deals with the directive principles of the state policy. Many of us seem to have forgotten this part, and we continuously keep harping upon part 3 of the Constitution of India, which is the fundamental rights. The directive principles have been described as forerunners of the UN Convention on Right to Development, which is an inalienable human right. The fundamental rights are the means that is sought to be achieved by a welfare state, and the actual ends is the directive principles, which are enumerated in part 4 of the Constitution of India. I would earnestly request every one of you to read Article 51 capital A of the Constitution of India, which deals with fundamental duties, and make a pledge that you will abide by it. These fundamental duties cannot be enforced by writs, and they can only be promoted by creating awareness. We seem to be talking more only about rights, and I find a trend where we seem to have forgotten our duties. If we have forgotten our fundamental duties enshrined by the Constitution of India, we do not have the locus standi to talk about the rights without performing those duties. Please always keep this in your mind. According to me, and according to many great thinkers, the caste system seems to be the major factor across this country which paves the way for violation of a lot of human rights. And that is the source, which is the reason for violation of a lot of human rights in this country. And so unfortunately, we live in a society where we don't see a human being, but we only see him through the tinted glass which we have named as caste. It follows us right from the time of our birth till we reach the grave. It is all pervading, and the men who rule us wants to keep it alive, and unfortunately caste plays a major role in the formation of governments in this country. I do not believe that it can be combated only by law. The generations to come must be insulated from this caste system, and only through a thorough awareness, an unstinted awareness, this caste system can be wiped away from this society. How were the reason why I emphasize on awareness is this. Just think about this. How were we treating persons who were suffering from a physical handicap or a mental handicap or a person who had a problem with sexual orientation some time back? We were so insensitive that we used to call them with that handicap, and we went to the extent of making them a mockery, of making them a center stage for a comedy scene in a movie. But today, by sheer awareness among the new generation, we have started respecting them, and we address them as physically challenged, mentally challenged, transgender, etc. Likewise, I believe that caste must be combated through awareness and awareness alone. Laws are available, and these laws have been in force for quite some time. But my dear friends, unfortunately, the law is not working in the way we wanted it to work in the society. So every parent will have a duty to create this awareness in a child at a very young age. Unless we create an awareness on the bane of this caste system, many of the human rights about which we are talking about will only remain in the paper. We will only be scratching the surface without touching the core issue, namely the caste system. The last and the most important issue which I wish to touch upon are these twin revolutions which is virtually taking over our life. These twin revolutions are the information technology and the biotechnology. A combination of these two technologies may very soon, in some decades, make many of us irrelevant. Man is dominating this world. Man is able to rule this world because of his innate ability to think. Man thinks, and therefore he is able to rule this world. In terms of physical strength, we are nowhere near the animals. But in spite of it, what makes us rule this world? What makes us overcome difficulties? What makes us really win over very difficult situations? It is our ability to think. And my dear friends, that is why the freedom of speech and expression is considered the cherished human right. Our minds, unfortunately, is now being hacked. Google today knows more than what you know about yourself. It knows our taste, it knows our preferences, it knows our wants, it is aware about our weaknesses, and it surely influences our decision-making process. Privacy is almost dead, and it's only a matter of time that this twin technology will be used to influence even the choice of government. Please bear this in your mind. already we are suffering from the bane of caste system, which in most of the cases becomes the reason for even formation of government. And the other big monster which appears today to be threatening the human race is this twin technology of information technology and biotechnology, which will surely influence the choice of government. This is apart from the fact that the algorithms are getting intelligent by the day, and they are capable of replacing human beings in many areas. For instance, the sex bots, which is becoming one major issue of discussion in many of the Western countries, is something about which most of us are not even aware in this country, I would say fortunately. These sex bots will undermine womanhood, and it will directly violate her dignity. So this is another facet of the technology which is taking over the human beings in a very large way, and this I consider to be one of the most important challenges which must be focused by all of us who are interested in safeguarding human rights. That is why I started my speech by saying that it requires an overhauling of our thought process with the idea of these human rights, which must also give its equal attention, if not more, on the challenges that are posed by the information technology and the biotechnology, which may have a very bad influence and which may lead to real damage to the human beings in terms of violation of human rights. We were focused more on this aspect. Without an independent thought, without the faculty of an independent thought, human rights will only remain to be a word in the book. I rest my case. Thank you so much for having invited me on this great occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Anand Venkatesh. Thank you very much. This has been an occasion when you have reminded all of us here how important it is to start human rights from the self, from the home, and then proceed. You have reminded us of our need to go back to 51A of the Constitution and ensure that we are updated with what is contained there in terms of fundamental duties, so that we are able to work both in terms of rights and duties. You have emphasized on the right to development, and then you have hit upon something which all of us perhaps will agree unanimously on the role that caste has been playing in the violations that we see across the country. And you have rightly said that it is not only the law that is required, it's a greater awareness among people. And you have warned us that in this generation, caste has also had its very, very important role in the formation of government. You have then come to something which is posing a challenge to all of us here, a challenge to the speakers in the course as well. And this is your twin technology that you spoke of, the information technology as well as the biotechnology and all its consequences. I want to assure you, sir, that in the course itself, you will see that towards the end, we have Usha Ramanathan, who will be speaking very specifically on the challenges, the concept, the challenges to the concept of human rights that we face today. So we want to thank you for this, And I want to get back to you as the course develops to let you know what is the progress that we are making here. And I'm sure the progress that we make here in the course will be something that will follow whatever you have said here. Thank you very much, sir. I want to remind everybody gathered here, before I go to the next speaker, that this course has been made possible with the assistance of 16, at the moment, unseen facilitators. The facilitators to the course are people who will be dealing with a group of at least 16 on participants, so that they will serve them as facilitators, mentors, clarify matters to them, see that the activities are carried out, remind them about the program. They are your friends. They are not here to supervise anybody. These are experts. Some of them, many of them, have been trained in Montreal, in Canada, in the famous International Human Rights Training Program of Equita. So I want that also to be placed on record. I am just the circus master. The actual actors are there. And then we have our core team, which comprises Mr. Matthew Jacob sitting in Delhi. We have Advocate Rajavelu, who's sitting in Salem. We have our activist, Mr. Ganesan, sitting and working from home in Tirunagar, in Madurai, and Madam Priya, our social worker, who was at the office with me, who have formed the core team which has put together this course. And then a whole team of admin and other assistants who are making this possible. So at the outset, let me thank them for what they have done, and let this be known to all of you. I will now go to invite the next speaker. I have, as I'm already properly guided, I'm guided to inform all of you that today we will not finish at 10:30. We might have to go a little after 10:30, and I hope it is okay with you for the inaugural session alone because of the technical hitches we had. Thank you very much, friends from the back room who have warned me to inform this. And we now will go to hear our keynote address. Judge, I can't see you, but I want to thank you. And I'm sure you have all our approval to leave the audience. And everybody understands that you have to be in court on time. And we want to valuably thank you. Thank you very, very much. Miloon Kothari is our keynote special address today. Miloon will be speaking on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948, remembering India's contribution. It's a beautiful lecture that he had already delivered a few months and I thought that would be the best keynote address that participants can have, to be proud of our own contribution as India to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Sometimes we are very disillusioned, but here is some hope that comes from this keynote address. Now, Mr. Miloon Kothari is a human rights and social policy expert, a good friend of ours, a trustee of the Center for Promotion of Social Concerns, which actually runs People's Watch and the Institute of Human Rights Education. He has served earlier as the first UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing. He is the founder of the Working Group on Human Rights in India and the UN, which brings together some of the pioneering human rights organizations and independent experts of this country to work for the promotion and protection of human rights inside the country, as well as raising it within the United Nations. He was also the founder of the Housing and Land Rights Network, a body that has done a lot of work in the issue of land rights in this country, and was, during his tenure as the UN Special Rapporteur, responsible for bringing into place the UN basic principles on development-based evictions and displacement, the current global operational human rights standards on the practice of forced evictions. You will hear about this not in this session, but in another session in Module 3. Miloon is somebody who is not only connected with the international, but is connected with the grassroots. So here we have Miloon Kothari, and I want to thank him while welcoming him for having accepted to be in our midst. He will be assisted by Rajawel, who will bring the PowerPoint on. The PowerPoints have also been shared to you in your WhatsApp group, in the major group. So in case you are not able to see it here, you can all tune into the PowerPoint which you have in your WhatsApp, which was dispatched to you as well. Over to you, Miloon. Welcome, Miloon. Rajawel?
Yeah. Hello.
Miloon on the screen.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I had some problems with my Wi-Fi. I'm back on. Can you hear?
We can see you. No problem.
Okay. Okay. Should I start, Henry, or you?
Yes, please start. I just finished your. I introduced you when you did not hear me. Don't worry, I did a good.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. I'm. Okay. Hello. Good morning, everyone. It's great to have this opportunity to address all of you, and I want to thank Human Rights Education Institute for inviting me. It looks like a wonderful program, and I'm also honored to follow after Justice Venkatesh, because some of the points he was raising, I will be elaborating on as well. So the address I'm going to deliver is based on I was fortunate enough to conduct some research at the United Nations Library in the summer of 2018, looking at the Rapporteur, which is the official records of the drafting of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. This is about 3,000 pages of the actual conversations that took place, the remarkable discussions that for the articles were drafted. And I want to begin by saying that it was really a lot of work, but it was a labor of love, because as I was going through these pages, I found the amazing contribution that representatives from India, who I will introduce you to, made to at least 5, possibly 6 of the articles of the Universal Declaration. And I want to begin by, yes, next slide. I want to begin by 2 quotes. One is from Mahatma Gandhi, where he said, "I do not want to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the culture of all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any." And the second quote, which is the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family, that's the next slide, is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. The next slide, please. I'm still on the first. Okay, yes, that one. So as we proceed with the lecture, you will see why I began with these 2 quotes. So India gained independence in 47 after decades of our freedom struggle, brought to a head a flurry of resistance at home and advocacy for freedom abroad. The UN was born in 1945 after a series of global initiatives that began with the birth of the League of Nations in 1920. The culmination of the developments was the adoption of what is considered one of the world's greatest living documents, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has now been translated into 300 languages and dialects. It's the most translated document in the world, and was called the common language of humanity, and has been called the conscience of the world. It is not only the dates of the struggle for Indian independence and the institutional build-up towards the world organization, the UN, that coincide, but there is, between the birth of India and the birth of the United Nations, as I will argue in this lecture, a remarkable degree of affinity and purpose of ideas, concepts, and fundamental principles used to buttress search of self-determination and human rights, which it was visions between India as a nation and the UN as a global entity was not a coincidence, but a well-planned strategy employed by Jawaharlal Nehru and under the guidance of Mahatma Gandhi. The intention was clear for these two great leaders that the pulpit offered by the World Organization would be used to counter British rule and as a forum where the freedom of all oppressed people around the world could be articulated and actions determined. So this lecture seeks to contribute to the scholarship that try to define the contours of this convergence. A great deal of scholarship exists about the content of the UDHR, but a biased view prevails in literature on the UDHR as to who were the women and men whose ideas defined the content and from where they came. I reviewed over 30 books on the UDHR, and I realized that Western scholars, legal scholars, and historians alike overemphasize the contributions of John Humphrey and René Cassin. The vast majority of books available on the UDHR overlook the significant contributions made by representatives of countries like India, which I will elaborate, Charles Lake, China, PC Chang, Philippines, amongst many others from the South. There are, of course, Western scholars who are exceptions to this rule, and I will refer to them at different stages of this lecture. The other goal of the research is based essentially to dispel the misconception that human rights are a Western concept and that the UDHR is a Western instrument, something that we still hear, but again, as you will see in this lecture, that is far from the truth. So the lecture will highlight the role of key Indians in this quest and the role of key global conferences and the seminal documents that contributed to the drafting of the UDHR and set the stage for the formation of an organization that would represent nations across the world and attempt to give them a voice in a range of intergovernmental and independent bodies that continue to contribute towards a world in larger freedom, a phrase used in the UN Charter. I think we can go back to the previous slide. I'm not at this stage yet. Yes, so in the aftermath of the First World War, several attempts were made by world leaders to ensure through the establishment of standards and institutions, the sleepwalking that led to the First World War would not be repeated. The United States led these efforts through the statements of President Woodrow Wilson, in particularly his 14 points address to the US Congress that called for self-determination of peoples and nations and suggested that, and I quote, a free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of all colonial claims based upon a strict observance of the principle that in determining all such questions of sovereignty, the interests of the populations concerned must have equal weight with the equitable claims of the government whose title is to be determined, end of quote. President Wilson put forward his 14 points in January of 1918. The time between the announcement of these 14 points until the spring of the following year, 1919, is termed as the Wilsonian moment. In India also, nationalists were inspired by the Wilsonian moment and the call for self-determination and formulated claims for self-government in language that resonated with a wider international discourse of legitimacy. Veteran nationalists like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai left the confines of the British Empire physically and conceptually to take this case before world opinion. The 14 points also called for, and I quote, a general association of nations must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. It's principle 14 of the 14 points. This idea was accepted by nations that were represented at the Paris Peace Conference, often called where they adopted the Versailles Treaty, which in 1920 led to the formation of the League of Nations. I will not go into detail in that, But India also made a contribution to the League of Nations, and of course, politics, self-interest of nations, and the emergence of leaders like Adolf Hitler led to the demise of the League of Nations. It is, however, without doubt that the United Nations that we have today was the fruition of the platform for global dialogue that the League established. And so the UN is a legacy of the ideas and methods of work that was established by the League of Nations. In India, both Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru regretted that the Western powers had not seized on the Wilsonian moment, and they had squandered the opportunity afforded by the League of Nations to create a global body that could work for the benefit of all, whether independent or oppressed people across the world. At the time of these developments, of course, India was under British rule, which severely limited Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru's roles as leaders able to play a global role. Hence, the opportunity offered by the San Francisco conference and then the drafting of the UDHR was for Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru an opportunity not to be missed. They sought in these global meetings to link India's struggle for the freedom from the yoke of colonialism to the freedom of all oppressed people. Next slide. So in the years preceding the adoption of the UN Charter, two important events contributed to the formulation of principles that would lead to the creation of a new international order. President Roosevelt, in his State of the Union address, proposed 4 freedoms: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. These principles were to play an important role in the conceptual development of the UDHR. It is, of course, an open question whether these were created by President Roosevelt, or was he inspired by other texts, including from our own religions. On January 1, 1942, 47 countries, including India, signed the declaration, and which formed the basis of the San Francisco meeting. In October 1945, 50 nations of the world adopted the UN Charter. Please go back to the earlier slide. I'll tell you when to move the slides. Adopted the UN Charter, and the Indian delegation was led by Ramaswamy Mudaliar, and I have a photograph here afterwards of showing him signing the chart. But before the conference itself in San Francisco, Mahatma Gandhi issued a press statement directed at the conference in April 17, 1945. In his press statement, before, next slide. Yes, in his statement, he quoted at length from the AICC resolution of August 8, 1942, and I will read it out. This is very, very important. While the AICC must primarily be concerned with the independence and defense of India in this hour of danger, the committee is of the opinion that the future peace, security, and ordered progress of the world demands of World Federation of Free Nations, and on no other basis can the problems of the modern world be solved. Such a World Federation would ensure the freedom of its constituent nations, the prevention of aggression and exploitation by one nation over another, the protection of national minorities, and so forth. And in the end, it says, he said that thus the demand for Indian independence is in no way selfish. This nationalism spells internationalism. I have highlighted the last sentence because it's a valuable reflection about Mahatma Gandhi's inspiring balance between intense nationalism and his world outlook. And you can read more about it also in Jawaharlal Nehru's discovery of India. But the biggest impact at the next slide. Next slide.
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Okay, it's a slide showing Mudaliar signing the charter. But the biggest impact at the San Francisco conference, which adopted the UN Charter, that's him signing the thing. Next slide, was by Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. He or she is addressing a General Assembly session. And in the months leading up to the conference, Pandit embarked on an extensive lecture tour of the United States. And the views expressed by Pandit at these events summarize the worldviews of Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru, that the freedom for India was a precondition for the freedom of all of the world's oppressed people. The UN Charter has, of course, its weaknesses. I will come to one of them. But largely as a result of the pressure from the new countries that participated in the discussions in San Francisco, contains several clauses on human rights. The challenge for the Indian leadership, of course, between the adoption of the Charter in 45 and the beginning of the deliberations of the UDHR in 47 was to ensure that the UN would, in fact, move away from the direction that a strict adherence to the UN Charter and the continued suspect motives of allied powers would have directed. It would have led to another compromise organization like the League of Nations. But India, on the other hand, wanted a global country where all countries of the world, including the ones that would gain independence in the decades following the adoption of the UDHR, were equal. In fact, the human rights that India wanted to be the foundation of the United Nations were the same human rights as those characterized in the Indian freedom struggle, as brilliantly articulated in, those of you who want to read more, in all the Quit India resolutions and in the drafting process during the Constituent Assembly. There was an overlap of about a year when we were drafting our constitution and the UDHR was being drafted. I'll come back to that. So the messages that were carried by India's representatives, Hansa Mehta, M.R. Masani, Begum Hamid Ali, Lakshmi Menon, to the UDHR framing process for the freedom of humankind from oppression of all kinds was the same as the independence movement message. So the collective voice of the Indian delegates therefore called for an independent India and independent global body free from the interference of colonized power for India and free of the duplicitous games that the allied powers, the UK being common to both, for the United Nations. So the worldview of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, honed through decades of freedom struggle, and the experience and indeed the resonance that Vijay Lakshmi Pandit gained on her visit to the US, would all converge into a powerful messages that Indian delegates contributed to the various articles of the UDHR. Almost immediately, India's work at the San Francisco conference was followed up with a daring and path-breaking attempt, which has not received significant attention in our country, at the UN General Assembly in 1946. In the face of fierce opposition from the allied countries, India succeeded in challenging the sovereignty clause of the UN Charter by having a resolution passed that sought to censor South Africa for its racist treatment of Indians living in South Africa. The victory gained at the GA, I will not elaborate on that, opened up a completely new perspective through which countries could no longer hide behind their nation's boundaries and continue to violate human rights without facing a global challenge by the UN General Assembly. So that was a very important event, and one more initiative took place before the UDHR, which also had a significant contribution, and that was UNESCO initiated a global study where they called for global thinkers, eminent people, philosophers, so on, to actually contribute to what they felt would be common across the world as basic principles, even though everyone was coming from different ideologies, different religions, and so on. And so the head of that project, next slide, actually wrote a letter to Jawaharlal Nehru asking for the contribution, next slide, for the contribution of his contribution and Mahatma Gandhi's contribution to this UNESCO study. Nehru replied, next slide, and said that he was far too caught up, obviously, with the last months of our freedom struggle, but he would ask Mahatma Gandhi to write. And it's quite amazing that Gandhiji actually took time out from what must have been one of the busiest days of his life to actually write a response to this UNESCO study. Next slide. And in that, it's on the right side of the page, I will only read that one paragraph. He said that, I quote, "I learned from my illiterate but wise mother that all rights to be deserved and preserved come from duty well done. Thus the very right to live accrues to us only when we do the duty of citizenship of the world. From this one fundamental statement, perhaps it is easy enough to define the duties of man and woman and correlate every right to some corresponding duty to be first performed. Every other right can be shown to be a usurpation hardly worth fighting for." And I think this was the message we heard this morning from Justice Anand Venkatesh as well. Then we move then to the actual drafting. Next slide. That's Eleanor Roosevelt with the UDHR after it was adopted. In May of 1946, the Economic and Social Council of the UN created a commission on human rights composed of members from 18 countries. India was a member of the first Commission on Human Rights, and they were charged with the task of drafting what at that time they called an International Bill of Rights. Opening the first session of the Commission, the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Henry Logier, stated that, and I quote, "The action taken in the case of South Africa established a precedent of fundamental significance in the field of international actions," what India did with the resolution. "For out of these debates, the general impression has risen up that no violation of human rights to be covered up by the principles of national sovereignty," end of quote. So when the drafting started, the drafters actually began with a clean slate, which is very, very significant. So we can see how much of India's work in San Francisco and with the South Africa resolution cleared the way for drafting of the UDHR. So the UDHR was drafted in 7 stages, a period stretching from January 47 to December 48, when it was adopted by the UN General Assembly on what we now celebrate as Human Rights Day. Next slide. Perhaps the most significant participant, you see her on the left, at these drafting sessions was Hansa Mehta. She had already represented India in the status of women and in a number of other UN bodies. She was a member of the Constituent Assembly, and of course a freedom fighter and a Gandhian, had been to prison and so on. So at the 8th meeting of the Commission, next slide, Mehta asked for consideration of a draft resolution to be submitted to the Commission on Human Rights, saying these are the kind of rights and the way they're drafted that India would want in the UDHR. It's all the rights we are now familiar with: freedom of opinion, freedom of assembly, association, equality, right to health, right to work. And at the 10th meeting of the Commission, it was decided that India's contribution would form one of the background documents for the drafting. So Hansa Mehta was the longest standing member during the process of the drafting, but there were also, as I mentioned, a number of other Indians: M.R. Masani, Begum Hamid Ali, Lakshmi Menon. And so the Indian contribution can be organized in the following themes. And I will start with the theme of the secular approach of human rights. The debates on human rights that form some of the most fascinating parts of the official records are related to where do rights come from. And some of this you'll be discussing tomorrow, but I'll tell you in the context of UDHR. So the lineage of the language from the American Declaration of Independence and the French Declaration is clear in the wording of Article 1 of the UDHR. But what sets the UDHR apart from the earlier seminal documents, and this reformulation has been critical to the evolution of human rights since the UDHR, is the omission of God as the source from which human rights derive. The struggle in the deliberations for this article was therefore on how to resolve what has been called the bargain about God and nature. And the Indian position had been made clear in the resolution that in the resolution that is on your screen. But the debate went on for a long time about God and natural rights as being inherent in human beings. But India insisted that, next slide. Yeah, so this was one of the earlier drafts. Before it also had God, but then it moved to this. But it also has the word natural rights. And in India, actually pursued this matter all the way to the third committee, where Lakshmi Menon said that although, and I quote, although different countries had different beliefs and political systems, they shared the same ideals of social justice and freedom, and that the purpose of the declaration was to set forth these ideals and to find a basis of agreement acceptable to all. As far as the Article 1 was concerned, there was general agreement that all men should live together in freedom and brotherhood. In that connections, lessons could be learned from democracies of both East and West. And she essentially stated that a lot of people in the world who do not believe in God, and we need a secular approach. So the next slide. So there's Lakshmi Menon addressing the third committee. Next slide. No, I'm sorry. Just go back to the earlier one before Lakshmi Menon. Okay, so this is the final text of the where you see that the secular approach essentially focusing on reason and conscience rather than God and natural rights. Next slide. The second and perhaps one of the most significant contributions that India made to the UDHR was on women's rights. Next. So when they started again drafting, the text said all men are born free and equal. Hansa Mehta objected to this. It's interesting that Eleanor Roosevelt did not. She said that men includes women, but Hansa Mehta and all the Indian delegates said that this is not correct. And of course, they were coming from their experience of extensive debates in the UN Subcommission on the Status of Women. And I will not go into all the details. Those of you who want to know can follow the discussions. But this was a major victory for women's rights. Next slide. And the final, actually, men was changed to human beings. The next article I want to look at is the question of the indivisibility of human rights. Justice Anand was speaking about that this morning. It broke new ground, the UDHR, with the equal recognition of economic, social, cultural, alongside civil and political rights. The delegations from the communist and socialist countries contributed to the inclusion of ESC rights in the UDHR. And India played an important role in this regard. Discussions at the Commission on the Right to Health, the Right to Work, and the rights of mothers and children illustrate the type of role played by India. Next slide. So Article 25 began like this: everyone has a right to standard of living, adequate health and well-being, including security, event of unemployment, disability, old age, and livelihood. The Indian representatives, primarily Hansa Mehta, during the beginning, but also towards the end, when actually it's interesting, India and the UK submitted a common draft and insisted that the rights of motherhood and childhood are particularly important, and that should include children who are born in or out of wedlock. So the final adopted text of Article 25, next slide, includes, you see, number 2. Begum Hamid Ali also played a role in these discussions. The next article, next slide, is actually this Begum Hamid Ali. Next slide. The next article is something that has become the cross-cutting and foundational principle of human rights across the human rights instruments, of course also in our constitution. And at that time, the subcommission on the prevention of discrimination and protection of minorities had already started its work, and they were given the task by the drafting team of the UDHR to say, well, what do we do with this article? Is it complete? What is missing? M.R. Masani, who was, Minu Masani was a member of the Swatantrata Party, friend of Jawaharlal Nehru, participated in the freedom struggle, represented us at that subcommission. And he vigorously took up the issue of the inclusion of color in the text. He also vigorously took up the issue of political opinion, which he thought was missing. I will not go into great detail. Again, you can follow this. And eventually, the texts went back and forth between the subcommission, the commission, number of other southern representatives, Mr. Malik from Lebanon, Carlos Romulo from Philippines, said that the Indian representative of India had raised important points. Since race and color did not mean the same thing, neither was the conception of color included in the term race. So, and then Mehta took up the issue again when it came before the commission. So I'll give you the final text that was adopted of the next slide. Next slide.
Just a minute.
You will see in that color and political or other opinion are included, and of course how critical they have been in our understanding and use of human rights subsequently. The next article dealt with the freedom of movement. It's something we're addressing these days with the virus. So the memorandum that was submitted by the UN Division on Human Rights for consideration by the Eleanor Roosevelt's drafting team contained a notion of freedom of movement, which was essentially between countries. So you could be free to travel from one country to another. Next slide. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including own, and return to his country. Hansa Mehta drew the attention of the Commission, and she had been, of course, coming from the debates in our own Constituent Assembly, and said, with regard to the right of freedom of movement, and I'm quoting, there was another freedom that I wish to mention to you. It is not freedom of migration only, but the freedom of movement within the state itself. There are laws today in many states which restrict individuals from one part of the country going into another part. Therefore, there must be freedom of movement within the state itself. This is very important. There was a lot of objection to this from the Russian delegation, from a number of other communist countries who did not want their minorities to be moving around freely. But India insisted all the way till the third committee. And next slide. And you can see that a second part was added. That everyone has to, in fact, it became then the first part, which people realized was the most important. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. And some of you may have seen a few days ago I don't recall, one of our high courts has actually used this article, which also was in our constitution, to argue against blocking borders between states during the virus. Next slide, please. I come back to Mahatma Gandhi. I think his spirit was there throughout the declaration. And what he wrote to UNESCO was, of course, very influential, and finally made it into Article, next slide, Article 29, where it says everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and development of his personality is possible. Of course, India wanted this article right at the front part of the first few articles of the declaration, but there was a lot of debate. But anyway, it's there, and I think it's probably one of the most underused articles in the world. Currently when we are faced with global crises like the virus, like climate change, and what we all need to do to get through this, it's very important to elaborate on this article. So throughout the deliberations during the creation of the UDHR, the Indian delegation distinguished themselves by consistently stressing on the principles of multiculturalism, cosmopolitanism, and the universality of human rights. Early in the deliberations, Hansa Mehta, carrying forward one of the core messages of India's freedom struggle, as articulated in words and actions by Mahatma Gandhi, stated, and I quote, "Such a bill of human rights must be a simple, forthright document which is easily understood." And this is very important, as you can see from some other legal documents, that this is drafted in a simple way. Hansa Mehta was keen that everybody should be able to understand the language. The concept of universality of human rights, however, needed some specificity, and both Masani and Mehta made major contributions towards that goal by including color, political opinion, and so on. And the Indian delegation also took active part in the deliberations on themes of self-determination. I have not had time to go into that. The need to strike a balance between individualism and collective rights, the need for just and favorable conditions of work, Article 23 of the UDHR, the necessary tension between sovereignty and international cooperation towards larger freedoms, and the right to petition. In fact, India wanted there to be a parallel complementary document where Hansa Mehta said once during the delivery, what's the point of having this declaration if we do not have a covenant or a convention which will allow us to also allow those whose rights are violated to petition. Of course, subsequently, we know in the history of the evolution of human rights in the UN, and you'll all be hearing more about this, that this has, what India stated at that point, has come to fruition with the different complaint mechanisms and so on. So Indian delegation played an important role in not letting the deliberations get bogged down in discussions on the benefits of specific political systems and ideologies. And Lakshmi Menon, during the final speech when the declaration was adopted, recalled that her delegation had taken part from the outset in the work of the Commission on Human Rights. She supported the declaration that the Commission had drawn up. She said it provided a solid basis for international cooperation, which is in Article 55 of the Charter, and it expressed the aspirations of people who, though they had but recently attained political freedom, had always accepted and practiced the noble ideals of religious tolerance and cultural freedom. So in conclusion, Mrs. Menon expressed the hope that, and I quote, "the declaration would pave the way for a new era of international solidarity, because the basis of rights was neither the state nor the individual, but the social human being participating in social life and striving for national and international cooperation." So in conclusion, I think those of you who want to go more into this, we can send you references. I have another longer lecture which is on YouTube, which will provide the link. But in conclusion, we can say that Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, Hansa Mehta, Masani, Lakshmi Menon Begum Hamid Ali, were all freedom fighters, and in the most radical sense, scholars and activists. What set them apart, and comes through when you read the official records, the UDHR, what set them apart was their practical and moral approach towards the contents of the UDHR. So the Indian delegates demonstrated a remarkable degree of magnanimity, forbearance, perseverance, and foresight in their written and oral contributions toward the formation of the UDHR. They were able to translate into words and action lessons learned from decades of the freedom struggle, and actually to be able to transpose this language learned from the articulation of human rights and freedoms as already expressed in the historic resolutions of the Indian National Congress, Quit India resolution, and the debates taking place in the Constituent Assembly. They were able to convey the worldview and demands for the emancipation of all oppressed people, conveyed in the speeches and writings of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, and of course through their own lessons as being active participants in India's freedom struggle. In the decades following the UDHR, next slide please, I just put that in to show, I don't know when it was taken, but perhaps the two great men are discussing the success at the United Nations. Next slide, please. So in the decades following the adoption of the UDHR, Indian delegates continued their active contribution through the UN. This is Vijayalakshmi Pandit being given the baton. Vijayalakshmi Pandit became the first woman president of the UN General Assembly, I think 52. So in the decades after the UDHR, India successfully tested the capacity of the UN and kept insisting on abolition of apartheid in South Africa, and became a very active member and a leader in the trusteeship council that led to the decolonization and freedom of peoples across the world. And of course, the UDHR has been embraced in our constitution. Hansa Mehta, in an interview she gave in 1969, said, and I quote, "It was a very good experience. I was at that time on the Fundamental Rights Committee of our Constituent Assembly, so I could compare the UN human rights and also the Indian fundamental rights. The elaboration of the fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution was thus linked to the UDHR, and we've seen the reverse process. So the UDHR continues to consistently inform judgments at the Indian Supreme Court. It has been translated into all of India's official languages and has become a powerful pedagogical tool for human rights education and an inspiring document for social movements across India and across the world. Of course, major challenges remain. Neither India nor the UN have lived up to their visionary potential that the founders of these two entities envisaged. The ideas, principles, and foundational postulates, however, are there for us to be recast into policies. And as briefly sketched in this article, however, if any country is destined to pick up the torch for human rights, social justice, and peace, it is India. And as Indians, we owe it to the great legacy of our freedom struggle and those great leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who led the movement of a United Nations for all. The past, present, and future of India and the UN are intertwined in what should be a seamless thread. However, it is an open question on whether India has the vision and the leadership to pick up the mantle of a world governed in larger freedom by a multilateral organization. The challenges the world faces today, racism, growing xenophobia, economic imperialism, narrow nationalism, are not too dissimilar to the devastation that the world wars, colonialism, and imperialism left for the world to deal with. We need once again to recast the country and the UN as harbingers of a more humane world, governed by respect for human rights and compliance with international human rights commitments. The contours of what may constitute such a world are there in the debates that led to the UDHR. And now we're celebrating 75 years of the UN. We have finished the 70th anniversary of the UDHR, 150 years of Mahatma Gandhi. We are still there. It is a good time to revisit the incredible repository of knowledge and wisdom that is available in debates that led to the UDHR. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hi, hello.
Thank you, Miloon. It has been a... Am I audible? Rajvel, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Miloon, for this wonderful lecture. There could not have been a better opening to a course on human rights than this. I want to assure, while thanking you, assure all the participants, because on the chat list we are receiving a lot of demands, be a little calm. We are going to circulate to you the full YouTube recording of this lecture. We are going to share with you 2 articles on this so that you can quietly, peacefully read and intake whatever was not possible. So that assurance I want to start. Thank you, Miloon. For friends gathered here, we have this whole starting with the UDHR today with 370 languages. And I can tell you, the Institute of Human Rights Education had its role in bringing 20 Indian languages inside. 20 Indian languages inside. We were assigned that responsibility, and IHRE proudly did it several years ago. Miloon, what was most moving here was the testimony that you provided with photographs and the letters. They meant a lot. They meant a lot to all of us as we watched you. We need to hear you again and again to remind ourselves, because what happens in the country today is far from what you told us. And what you told us, we have to intake, but what you told us, people in governance have also to take in. Particularly your emphasis on the secular approach of those days that the Indian delegation did, the indivisibility of human rights which was pushed, the concept of non-discrimination that was pushed, the freedom of movement that was emphasized, and of course, finally, the whole question of rights and duties that was there. I want to tell you, Miloon, this will be a special address that will be remembered throughout the 21 days at various points of time. Remind us, and actually at that time. Let me make sure I've got all the announcements made. Yes, and then you finally finished showing us how close the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the constitutional provisions, particularly those of fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy are. And that is precisely what we will see as the course develops when we go into the definition of human rights. Thank you very, very much, Miloon, for with us. There could not have been anything. Can we all, wherever we are, give a solid clap for this special address, wherever we are.
Thank you. Thanks, Henry.
Thank you. Thank you. I will now move to Maja Daruwala. Maja Daruwala, who is going to felicitate all of us. Maja has a very, very long CV, but I will tell you, she's a barrister. She has worked with a variety of organizations, but I will back the longest, where she has been the director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative for 20 long years. And she has given it up, where she now serves as its senior advisor. Her passion is on issues to access to justice, and particularly specialist on police reforms, specialist on prison reforms and work, and of course, a very strong concentration on the right to information that she provided during her leadership, and even now it continues with the CHRI. I am personally proud to tell you all that if we exist today as an organization, this lady was responsible for being the chair of our advisory board at one point of time. I don't know whether she remembers it, but I think I need to remind her that she was somebody who bullied, somebody who can really bully me. There is somebody who can, you will believe, can bully me. That is Maja, because that is the trust we place on her and what she is and what she believes in. We are extremely happy, Maja, that you are with us. You will definitely come in again, just as I will be requesting Miloon to come in again, so that the participants are able to establish a closer link with you through other sessions. But now I welcome you to deliver the felicitation. Thank you, Maja.
Thank you. Good morning. I am told that I must felicitate the people who are going to take this course. as well as those people who are going to be resource people. I have no idea what a felicitation is, but I wanted to say a couple of things. One is, Miloon, before you started, you sent me a little note saying that I've heard this speech before, but honestly, I needed to remember, and everybody needs to remember. That's what I want to say. One felicitates people after they have done something. Right now, people are beginning this course. And so I wanted to put forward that congratulations for taking this course. It shows an animus, it shows an intention which is going to change your life. I'm particularly talking to the students and of course those people who come from different walks of life, who suddenly are taking an interest in human rights, maybe like me revising them, maybe like me working in them, and wanting solidarity. Whatever it is, congratulations for taking this step. I would like to put forward 3 or 4 things or 3 or 4 concepts which I think are really important for you to remember. I should be very kind and felicitate and then go off, and I am very late for another meeting, but what I wanted to say is there are challenges that you are going to face which have been touched by different people who have spoken to you before. Human rights as a concept is known all over the world. Human rights in the reality of people's lives is simply not known. You saw the people who had been from India, who had been part of the Universal Declaration. You would have thought that in the first 70 years of this country, human rights, both as a concept and in relation to realities, would have found themselves implemented through the machineries of government, through the belief of people. But that has not happened. And people of my generation should also be part of the blame for not making it happen. So therefore, people of your generation have got double the duty to make it happen. And you are going to face challenges. One is the challenge of society. In our own daily ordering of life, through the caste system, through the way that we believe in families, through religion, through the belief that people in authority are right and should not be questioned, through the belief that people have a role in life, like you see in the caste system, like you see when you relate to men and women, that discrimination is okay. All of these things are going to prove a challenge to you. If you question authority, you are going to be called anti-national. If you talk about human rights as against the rights of the power of the government, you are going to be called anti-national. This is the course that is going to show you how to challenge that. Not how to challenge that out of defiance, but how to challenge that because it is the right thing to do, because you must challenge. You cannot keep quiet. This course and all of you who are participating in it will be a huge waste of time if you have learned nothing that makes you to give the logical argument, the moral argument, the lawful argument for accountability, for believing you are a citizen and not being a subject. There is nothing worse in life or in a society than to have a willing slave. A willing slave acknowledges his master and subordinates all himself and subordinates all around him. You will come across challenges that people will talk about bread versus freedom. This was an old argument which we thought we had all laid to rest. Now, with the corona in our midst, it is going to be used as a accretion of more and more power to those who already have power. My question is, where is the accountability? Your question must be, where is the accountability? Not accountability so that you are challenging and in your face, but accountability that will protect the lives of thousands and millions of people who make this country what it is. This does not mean there is only one lot of people who ever can make this country. This country is a collective effort of millions of people people who are poor and therefore are considered powerless and therefore are considered useless. You have only to see the migrants walking along the streets today, asking to nothing more than to go home, to see that these are the people who are making the country, who will in future make the country, who have built your houses, fed your children, given you water, found the electricity and created the electricity in your houses. These are the people who need the first attention of the powerful. Those are the kinds of things you are going to be asked to challenge. Human rights, when I walk into a room, a lot of people whisper, "Ye to human rights wali aayi." My question to those people is, if you are not for human rights, what are you for? You are certainly not for the constitution of this country. You are probably among those people who we call terrorists. Discrimination. Discrimination is wrapped up in religion, social belief, ideologies, and we are tempted to say, yes, this is our tradition and therefore we must have it. No. Do you want a country that starts off with equality and that is tied up to your equality? How can you be equal if you are either superior or inferior and you accept that? So these are the challenges you're going to have to face. The judge talked about ethics and the judge talked about the challenge of technology. Indeed, that is a huge technology. Biology, technology, and the biosciences are going to throw up huge challenges. My question again to you people, all of us, including myself, is what is the principles behind the adoption of a technology? Is technology, for example, for the courts, in the courts, is technology going to be for the judge, for the better management of the bureaucracy, for the convenience of the bureaucracy, or is the principle going to be for the client group that holds it? Is it going to create duty holders who are more accountable or less accountable? What are the principles when we go to adopt technology that have to be used? There are lots more things that one could say, but I have taken enough of your time, and I thank you for listening to me. And the last thing I want to say is engage where you can. You cannot be out of engagement with those people in power and the people in authority, whether they are in your family or whether they are governing you or whether they are in the UN. You have to engage with them. You cannot live parallelly, and confront where you must and build yourself to confront so that no one can put you down because you are a singularity. The singularity is what we believe in, but solidarity is the way forward. So when you go to wisdom with all. When you go to war with all the wisdom that you can garner from the people around you and from this course. Thank you very much, Henry.
Thank you, Maja. Always what you are, a person who reminds us of our challenges, never into utopia. And I only want to conclude with, in spite of all that you had said, the last few words. And I think that is important for our course, that all of us are taking in this knowledge of human rights, this information inside us. But the challenge is that it is to help us engage concretely. And I want to show you, Maja, the last module is on skills. The skills for ensuring that each of us are capable of engaging with people in power, but engaging not as singular persons, but as people in solidarity with a variety of people around us. I think the last word again was asking us to have the courage to confront. It is important that we are willing to confront. These days, this is very much necessary for us. And I think you have told us to get ready for the war, but get ready with wisdom to face the war that is ahead. Thank you very, very much, Maja. This is exactly what we wanted, and we have got that. And I'm sure participants will have more opportunities. Friends, just Google Maja Daruwala, and then you will come to know a little more about her as we move along. Thank you very, very much, Maja. And last, we have somebody who's going to find it very, very difficult today because she is somebody who can address for hours together and standing there on the podium. And today she has to sit and make this present. Our beloved Dr. V. Vasanthi Devi. Dr. V. Vasanthi Devi, I would like to introduce in a different way this morning. Dr. Vasanthi Devi was the candidate who contested Dr. J. Jayalalitha in her constituency in the last elections. I mean, if you want to follow what Maja said of engage, there could not have been a better engagement than this. We might have different opinions on the engagement, but she engaged. And for those who saw her at this age of past 80, she was into the streets, climbing that rickety little van and addressing people. The passion for human rights. An academician. She is our vice chancellor. She is a college teacher who believed in rights education when she was in college, not after retirement, when she was in college, and who was a teacher trade unionist. So she has also gone to jail for the protest that she did on her positions as part of the teachers' movement. Dr. Vasanthi Devi was then the vice chancellor of the Manoenmani and Sundarlar University in Tirunelveli, where she served until her retirement. And after her retirement, she was invited to serve as the chairperson of the State Commission for Women in Tamil Nadu, a responsibility that she held at a time when the commission itself was not a statutory body. It was a very interesting story. I will be inviting her again to tell you all about that story. Today is not the day, but you should know who she is. And of course, all of us in the Institute of Human Rights Education are extremely happy that it was during her 10-year tenure from the year 2004 till 2005. She's correcting, see how alive she is. 2013, when she was our chairperson. And all her colleagues, partners who served with her are there in the promotion of teaching human rights education in the schools of our country in over 20 different states. That is Dr. Vasanthi Devi. And after all this, today she heads what we call a Palli Kalvi Padugappu Iyakkam, a movement of teachers for the protection of school education, which told her you'd have to come on. She said, Zoom, I know Zoom, no problem. I communicate with my movement people on Zoom. Ma'am, we are fascinated that you were able to be with us, and I welcome you to felicitate the participants. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Henry. You are the spirit, you are the dream, and you are the brain and the hand behind human rights education. So first of all, I want to wish you and your entire dedicated team. And I'm very happy and excited to be here at the time when you are launching this course on human rights. Excited because this is a renewal of a bond, a bond that had been forged, a fraternity that had been forged for years, a bond that took us, as you said, across the length and breadth of this country to 20 states during almost 10, 12 years. So that is the reason why I say that I'm excited to be here. Now, the learned speakers before have said many things. I just want to say a few things. I definitely want to say a few things. Now, human rights is an affirmation of life. It's a celebration of life. It's a search for self-expansion. It's a search for freedom. I hope all of you who have enrolled in this course, you will not come here just for getting a certificate or come here to fill the corona-induced empty days, but for something beyond, something deeper. Now, friends, I think there is no need to emphasize why we need a course on human rights today. Now, we are witnessing perhaps the greatest, most gruesome tragedy of our times. In fact, before I go into that, maybe I would, to me, what seems to be a very, very poignant introduction to why we need human rights. All of you know about Rohit Vemula and his most tragic and most powerful suicide note. I just read from his note. I quote Rohit Vemula's, "The value of a man was reduced to his immediate identity and nearest possibility, to a vote, to a number, to a thing. Never was a man treated as a mind, as a glorious thing made up of stardust. In every field, in studies, in streets, in politics, and in dying and living." Unquote. It is to reclaim that human being that Rohit Vemula has talked to us in his last tragic letter that human rights must be dedicated. Friends, I think there's no need to emphasize the crying need for a course on human rights today. Maja mentioned a few of these. We are meeting at a time when a horrendous human rights disaster is playing out all around us. Hundreds of thousands of migrant workers are desperately trying to return home in their own country. The lockdown turned them into refugees, into beggars, and hungry, battered, with nothing in them. They are walking. They are walking under the sun, walking under the stars, sleeping on railway lines and getting crushed under the railway lines. You would have seen the Indian Express headlines one of these days. India is walking home. That's what it said. Yes, that is the real India. The India that is walking home. But they are not allowed to go. But they are not even allowed to go because they are the cheap labor needed for running our industries, keeping our urban centers running. And the migrants are the cheapest labor force. Now, they are the indentured labor of today's democracy. That is why they can be kept in bondage. Our response to the plight of the migrant worker brings out all that is rotten in today's India. Obscene class inequality, loss of society's moral compass, paralysis of politics, and toxic media. Now, one more issue. Today, state after state in India is scrapping labor laws and offering a no-holds-barred field for exploitation of the prospective employers. Rights won after a century of struggle, minimum ones like 8 hours labor day and minimum facilities in the workplace. All these are being taken away today. So where are we now? It's a predatory capitalism of the 19th century that's going to be the order of the 21st century India, unless all of us raise our voices. And April, the month dedicated to Ambedkar, the architect of the Constitution, just got over. We are helplessly watching our basic constitutional rights being cynically, callously subverted. Our precious freedoms guaranteed to every citizen of India, like freedom of speech, of writing, of assembly, and so on, are being violated with impunity. And just before the pandemic broke, the brazenly discriminatory state passed anti-Muslim citizenship laws. And we saw during the protests armed mobs of Hindu vigilantes, backed by the police, attacked Muslims in the working class neighborhoods of northeast Delhi. Houses, shops, mosques, schools were burnt. So communalism is spawning rights violations of a stark kind that are active in the days of the pandemic too. Even today, it is active. Miloon Kothari talked about how secularism as a precious value was brought into the Human Rights Declaration. And this is what secular India, where secular India stands for. Now, apart from these specificities of today, of immediate India, now every day all around us, human rights violations against the poor, the marginalized, the voiceless, the vulnerable are taking place. And then, of course, the eternal verities of holy, holy land of India. Justice spoke about the caste system, caste, the steel frame of Indian society, never dying, taking new incarnations. So India is a land of 1,000 oppressions. Millions of our people, children, women, Dalits, Adivasis, the poor, the slum dwellers, many others are subjected to injustices, right denials, exploitations, oppressions, discriminations, violence. How do we change such a brutal, heartless world? That is what we are here to look for. Now here we are talking of injustices to which we have become insensitive, to which we have become immune, from which we turn our heads away because reality is too frightening or seemingly too impossible to alter. So it is for this that it is to fight these, as Maja said, to take on this war as truly committed warriors. That is why we are here. So now, a word about People's Watch. Now, who has the credentials to offer a course on human rights? It is not the learned pundits sitting in the comfort of their arms, their homes or in their colleges. It is not the scholarly PhD thesis writers who have the right to offer courses on human rights. But please don't mistake me. I'm not in any way belittling the academics. I'm an academic myself. But truly, who has the right to offer, who has the moral authority, the credentials to offer a course on human rights? It is only those who have stood with the victims, with those who have been violated, who have been brutalized, who have been marginalized, who have been driven out. It is those who have stood with them, spoken for them, struggled with them, and taken up their cases in, I'm sorry if I'm using that word, in our insensitive courts and given them refuge. It is they who have the authority, the moral right to offer a course on human rights. And that is why the course that is being offered by People's Watch, by the Institute of Human Rights Education, is different from courses that are offered in university. So I think all of you are very lucky that you are able to enroll in this. So we have gathered here to ask questions, to do a little soul search, and to make a commitment. Now, after talking about all the horrors of today's world, so where do we begin? The tremendous historic task, or a task that has never been attempted in human history, of changing this world. Where do you sow the seeds for changing the world? It can only be sown in the hearts of children, in the hearts of youngsters, in the classroom, where the destiny of the nation is forged, as Nadu said. So and that is why human rights education was taken. And that is why today I'm very, very happy to know that almost 70% of those who have enrolled or either students or it says academicians. I guess they are mainly faculty members or researchers. Now, in more than any field, perhaps it is in the field of education that human rights will have to be injected, because today education is a completely alienating process. Now, anybody who has worked in the academy for years and has had a heart would know how much the campus is alienated from the world around. So we are busy building up huge walls that will cut off the academe, the university, the college, the school from the community. There's not even a window through which you would let the breeze of reality to flow through into your campus. And that is what our alienating education has today become. But one thing we have to learn, education has always been an instrument for domination. Education has always been, all through history, it has been an instrument for dominating, for thought control, and for manipulation of the mind, as I forget who said this. And today it has assumed grotesque proportions, and that is why today you find courses that talk about the society, history, sociology, even literature. These are valueless. Now today it's only the technical courses, the completely sanitized technical courses that are in great demand. And what do these children who are programmed today to become the leaders of the world to straight away go into Silicon Valley? How are these children programmed? Now I always say, Henry talks about this, that when they log on to the cyber world, they get completely logged off the world around, the immediate world that gave them birth, that nurtured them, that has made them what they are. And human rights education should break this disastrous alienation and build a bridge between the academy and the community. And that is the role that I think human rights education need to fulfill. So ultimately, I would say, in such a dismal educational scenario today, the need for human rights education is self-evident. It is to radicalize education as a whole, to make it truly an instrument for liberation, to break 1 million bondages. It is an antidote to the ills of the contemporary education system. It is the fruition of the search for alternate, liberating education that has been pursued for a long time by reformers, radicals, nation builders, dreamers. Human rights education is part of the struggle for human rights. I will end with a quote from Einstein. I quote, "It's a struggle, an eternal struggle in which a final victory can never be won. But to tire in that struggle would mean the ruin of society." Unquote. So I wish all of you all the best. I'm sure you will immensely benefit this. This course has taken, it is taking a handful of potent seeds in its hands and is throwing it around to all of you. I think wherever it falls, it will bloom. 100 flowers will bloom. And I hope each flower will pollinate 100 other flowers. Thank you and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the very inspirational felicitation address that you have provided us. We are humbled by the credentials you have provided the Institute of Human Rights Education, People's Watch, to initiate this. We drew inspiration from you, and we say it with all humility at our command. We are extremely happy that we will also be inviting you later in the course, where a few more of your engagements with institutions which are fighting for the protection of women's rights could be explained to the audience. Thank you very, very much, ma'am, for having been with us. I don't want to take up any more time because we have crossed the time today. And I want to first of all apologize to all the participants for this cross.
Just 1 minute, Henry. 1 minute. I really want to wish and greet all the coordinators who had worked with me for years, who are going to hold the mantle for this entire course. I see Anand Ramakrishnan alone there. So to all of them, my fraternal greetings.
Anand Ramakrishnan is there, Saji is there, Pradipta is there, Margaret is there, Susai is there, and I can go on, I'm sure.